Hi, this is a video portfolio put together to reflect my teaching experiences during the Alternative Education Licensure Program at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. The artifacts included in this portfolio are examples of student work based on applied alternative education approaches learned in the program and implemented in my high school class here in Verona Area High School in Verona, Wisconsin. There's my classroom. The educational mentors for this portfolio include my professors and peers in the program, colleagues in alternative education here at school, and my supervisor at the high school. The students I worked with during this program are all English language learners, aged maybe 16 to actually 15 to 20, and they represent many different countries. Since my graduate study during this program focused on recognizing and responding to cultural and racial diversity by using alternative approaches, I decided to offer an alternative approach, a medium for my portfolio. So this is organized as a video artifact tour of the student work displayed in my classroom, and it will be submitted on my YouTube page. This portfolio is set up in 3 sections. It incorporates descriptions of my clinical experiences as in kind of a narration that I'm going to give during the tour. Teaching in an alternative setting within a mainstream setting, description of the artifacts, and also a connection with the Wisconsin teaching standards and reflections on my experiences. The artifacts, narrative, and reflections demonstrate my competency, hopefully, as a teacher who organizes and plans systematic instruction based on elements relevant to the 10 Wisconsin teaching standards. So, for section 1, you can't see this. There's going to be paper that accompanies this, but I have 2 artifacts in the individual timelines in the mural project. I've incorporated Wisconsin standards 1, 3, 5, 7, and 10. The content is an immigration unit, and it's English language acquisition in the WIDA standards of speaking, listening, reading, and writing. The classes, this was kind of a long project, as were most of these projects. And the classes that I included in this one were secondary ed 705, 706, and 707. That was representing learning and diversity, and the marginalized learner, and then also formal and informal learning environments. I found that most of the content from the classes overlapped with what I was doing with pretty much all of my projects. So I'll begin. The 2 artifacts I included in this section were individual timelines, which I pushed into a collaborative mural project. It was part of a larger immigration unit. The students some were brand new to the country, and they were completely disengaged in learning English in the traditional ways. And I chose to start with this portfolio because it really was my first real foray into applying some of these ideas in my classroom, and it yielded mixed results, which I'll tell you about. But the idea came up when my students were totally disengaged with learning English, and I was frustrated. And we had some discussions about why they were not engaged in school, particularly in English class, and I found out that a couple of the students didn't want to learn English at all, and for that matter didn't even want to be in the country. So that was really an eye-opening experience for me, since I had assumed they all wanted to learn English. So I had to change that assumption and look at what I had. Most of these students had interrupted schooling in their first languages, some pretty seriously, years missing, and most did not have great academic skills and experiences. All of them had jobs, which, like out of necessity, had them working late hours and often left them really exhausted when they were in school. They expressed feelings of being excluded and marginalized in the school environment. They were upset with what they perceived as racism in the school community. And, basically the traditional high school setting was not working for them for a lot of reasons. So in representing learning, I think it was we were studying how to make correlations between inquiry and image, and we had a couple outstanding artists in this class. So I decided to explore some of their issues with disconnection through inquiry and imaging, which speaks to WTS1, states that the teacher understands the central concepts, tools of inquiry, and the structures of the discipline he or she teaches, and can create learning experiences that make these aspects of subject matter meaningful for students. I restructured the unit to address this goal, and since I did have these artists in the class. I decided to have them work collaboratively on the class mural. I envisioned this completed mural as a potential bridge into the larger school community also, and as a way to help mainstream student staff get to know these students, which speaks to Wisconsin Teacher Standard 10. And you know what? I just decided I'm not going to read all these teacher standards on this on this video tour. Otherwise, it's going to be way too long. Anyway, so to begin the unit, I had them, and to get them connected with the material, I had them create a timeline of their own lives. And I'm going to show you one of them over here. My classroom's really messy, so work with me here. And hopefully you'll be able to see this. He has an area where he was born, his first time in New York, his first time in school. He, I think, left Mexico and got his first job. 2004, something happened that really changed his life, and I forget, he explained all these things, and I can't quite remember all of them. There was a car accident he had in 2009, and then he says, my dad, muerto, his father died, and my last five, my life go much bad, he tells me. And he goes down to 2012, which is when we started this project. This kid was an amazing artist. So anyway, what happened was I designed these timelines as a structure to help them review their own history and to isolate important parts of their lives, and also to help activate background knowledge for an immigration study, which was the content of the English project. They were encouraged to interview their parents, older relatives, to understand their history as immigrants, while also, connecting with their personal history, as this student showed. The project was art-based, and students with academic difficulties and different learning styles were able to approach it through drawing, and then I had them do the writing and apply the academic content. This speaks to Wisconsin Teacher Standard 3, and I'll show you one other example of this from a young man that was born in Somalia. I don't know if we can see this or not, hopefully. I learned to drive. I moved to U.S. because there's war in Syria. I started Verona High School. He has a whole montage here of his pictures when he was a baby, what they had in Syria. They lived in Dubai for a while, and then when the war began and having to leave the country. Okay, so that led into the next, I'm going back to my notes here, into the next part of this project, where I had the students use their timelines to transition to the second part of the unit, which is the collaborative mural project. And based on the themes that emerged from their timelines, and they all had one, they decided to name the mural Borders and No Borders. They were very engaged in the mural creation process, and I'm going to carry my computer over here while I show you this, so bear with me. And as you can see, they made some pretty bold statements. This is the mural. Let me get a background check here, shot of it, and then I'm going to go close up a little bit so you can see these. What was interesting about this mural is in a couple of instances I had to defend the mural. There was a particular administrator who was concerned about one of the pictures promoting gang violence. The students, the administrator, and I had a conversation about being able to express authentic experiences. In this case, the young man's father had been involved in drug dealing and had been murdered, I believe, in Mexico. And I felt it was important that he be able to do that, so we had to negotiate with the administrator about this. And I remember we blocked out the cigar, we put it back in, we blocked it out, we put it back in. And I finally made a connection with another administrator who was extremely supportive of the mural. She, quote, approved the mural. So, but in the meantime, I had the students defend their pictures that they drew. And this ended up bringing the students closer together. They bonded through this process, and I'm going to back off here and tell you which is using the understanding of group motivation, which Wisconsin Teacher Standard number 5. So they had to defend this project to the larger community of the school, and it really kind of pulled them together. I'm going to just keep showing you this a little bit. This is one concerning the border, coming across the border, and that is, I think, a Mayan mask for death, what they perceive when they get across the border, unfortunately. This is another one that promotes Mexican culture. This young man was the Los Lobos, the wolf that crossed the border. Very interesting. Okay, I'm going to back off from this for a minute. Continue my narrative. So, reflections. My decision to radically change my instructional strategy by introducing this project yielded both good and bad results. The reason I made the decision is basically because I was taking these great classes. I had the support of the classes and professors. I had the support of a fabulous administrator and mentor here at Verona. However, others outside the classroom were not very supportive of the mural. And were it not for the administrator I just mentioned, we may not have completed the mural at all. My main goals were to, when I implemented this, I think, well now, as in retrospect, were to help give the students a voice, to help them deal with some of their feelings of isolation and to help them get better engaged in English. I was definitely successful in the first part of that goal. Their voice comes out in they actually spoke, physically spoke, but they also made really powerful images, and a lot of discussion came out of this, so I think that part worked really well. They loved the project, and they were really able to express themselves in unique ways. I was definitely able to engage them in higher order thinking skills because we looked at all the issues surrounding this mural. And I felt that their mural really depicted their struggles in a very authentic way, and they were very proud of the results. So it was successful in the aspects mentioned above, but there are parts that were, I consider, not very unsuccessful, but unsuccessful. My curricular goal of helping them to, learn more English and engage in English conversation was definitely not met in a timely fashion. And because all the students were Spanish-speaking friends, it was really difficult to help them connect that experience to learning English, since they tended to speak with each other in their first language. Even though I worked to Wisconsin Teacher Standard 7, I was not satisfied with the amount of time it took to complete the mural. If I were to teach the unit again, and that would be a big if, I would make sure the project was set up in chunks with deadlines and clear English standards for each piece. I would allow them L1 or first language for initial expression, but then have them translate their work into English. Wisconsin Teacher WTS 9 talks about the teacher being a reflective practitioner. I definitely reflected a lot on this mural. I also learned from this project that it's really important to have an ally or somebody with like vision who has had experience with school politics for sensitive situations like this one. This mural was the first time I had really approached this administrator, who I consider also a mentor. And she not only advocated for the mural, she supported me by insisting that I stay true to myself and not give up on something I think is right. And this was an invaluable professional lesson for me to learn in the K-12 environment. It's especially, for me, it's important to continue professional development in this area, as I often feel I need to advocate for my students, because certain environments don't always move quickly to change some of the issues related to poverty and cultural marginalization. So that is my mural story. I'm going to move on to section 2. The artifact in this section is their monster stories. I'm going to show you one. The WTS standards are 9 and 10. The content was writing and Frankenstein, and the class was a strategic reading class. Let's see, the classes I wrote down here also were representing learning and the marginalized learner. However, once again, I think that all the classes I took in the program, they all sort of, overlapped each other. And I was doing most of these projects during most of the classes in one form or another. Okay, so in particular in the marginalized learner, we looked at what are the factors that marginalize students and how to recognize and minimize those factors when teaching. So I chose an extension of a literature unit in which we read the novel Frankenstein. The students were not interested in the novel, hardly very interested at all, because they didn't see any relevance to their lives. So as part of the unit, I extended the plan to include an individual exploration of monsters. It was scaffolded to help all levels of learners. We began with anticipation question charts, which help students design it helps students assess their own experiences with monsters and monster stories. They were asked to create their own monsters, and they were able to begin with either a drawing or a story, but needed to do both to complete the assignment. There were few parameters to the creation aspect of this project. The students, felt free to do whatever they wanted to with the creation of their character. It wasn't so much discussed as it just happened as the project progressed. So, and using the themes that emerged from these stories, I think helped them to connect to the themes in the novel Frankenstein. Revenge, horror, personal issues. So I'm going to show you, this is the artifact I've chosen. Now I will say that some of these students were not interested in, that these were very, very private. And this particular young woman kept asking me when she wanted it put up, but she also wanted it taken down. So I'm going to just read a little excerpt from this. She starts out, "The Orc. I have a secret that I have to hide from everybody. Orc will do anything to get close to the girl he likes, even though he's a monster. Now Orc must disguise himself into a perfect vampire. What will happen when everyone finds out that the perfect vampire is an ugly monster? People know that he's a monster. They hate him, avoid him, and hurt him every time they see him. Orc is falsely accused of murder and is sacrificed to clean every house in town every day. When people realize Orc is innocent, they take pity on him and fly him to Illyria, a land of mystical creatures. Orc, unfortunately, sorry, I've lost my place here. Orc, unfortunately, falls in love with one of the cutest creatures in Illyria. She is a teenager. A vampire named Kakali, but Orc thinks that he's too ugly for her, and she might get scared of him and never want to talk to him. So he thought of something, and he got an idea. That idea wasn't that bad at all. He disguised himself into a vampire, an attractive one. The next day, he was so excited to talk to her. When he saw Kakali, he went up next to her and said, 'Hey, beautiful.' Kakali turned around and whispered, 'Sorry, I don't know you, and I don't talk to strangers.'" Yeah, so anyway, this is quite a bit of a story here. You'll see she goes for a long way. Nobody pushed her to write this. This is a girl, that does not like to write at all. She ends it by saying, "Orc learned one thing, and that's never be someone else, because you'll get something you don't want, especially if you're not going to fix every mistake you did." So what happened with these, I'll come back here to my computer. With this project, it worked well in the reflection section for some of the students who hated writing by helping them image first and then write. So by allowing them to create their own, quote, monsters as an entry point, the students were more invested in the project when it came time to do the writing portion. But both the good and bad aspect of this project is that I allowed and in most cases encouraged the students to personalize their monsters. Some of the student issues that arose were very difficult for the student, needed to be outside of the project. The kids, one student in particular spoke with a counselor about some of the aspects of her monster that came from her own experiences. I find that it's a balancing act as a teacher to help students to feel empowered through their work, but also keep it at a manageable level for the student while still helping them attend to the content. In the case of this particular student, I was able to consult with a more experienced colleague about how to handle, emotional distress. These students kind of put their own problems and lives into these stories, and some of them had some pretty serious problems and background issues and things. So that speaks to both WTS, Wisconsin Teacher Standard 9 and 10. about reflecting and also fostering relationships with school colleagues, parents. In one case, we actually were in contact with a parent about some of what came out of one of the students' stories. As a reflective practitioner, if I did this lesson again, and I probably would, I'd build in more discussion time to the project so that the students were able to process their writing if they needed to, talk about some of the issues that came up, maybe one-on-one with me or with, each other. I also learned that I need to allow them to delve deeply enough into their own experiences to engage with the content, but not enough to become overwhelmed and lose the focus of the lesson. And again, future development, professional development, I do hope to learn more alternative methods that help me achieve this balance in instruction, because as it happened, the fact that they were able to write these personal stories brought out a lot more connection with the material, which was Frankenstein in the unit. They were much better able to relate to the character in the novel. However, as I said, there were definitely some downsides to that too. My last and final project is a portfolio of final artifact, of a student resource guide that's being compiled by students from Syria, Somalia, Mexico, and Puerto Rico. I chose this artifact because I felt it reflected an alternative approach to language acquisition, because it was project-based learning, and it shifted some of the, quote, instruction to the student in terms of student-directed learning. The project was for an ELL intermediate English class, and the object was to have the students create a guide that could be shown to new students from other countries. The academic objectives, again, were to increase students' language acquisition in English in the 4 WIDA domains of speaking, listening, reading, and writing. They began with an activation exercise, which involved them thinking about, reflecting, writing about their first day at high school, being new to the country and new to the language. We had, from the reflections or the initial activation exercise, we had classroom discussions and short writing summaries of the discussion. We reviewed other materials related to being new to the country. This created many discussion opportunities and helped the students to focus on what might be important to include in the resource guide, which works with Wisconsin Teacher Standard 6, using effective verbal and nonverbal communications, as well as instructional media and technology to foster active inquiry, collaboration, and supportive interaction in the classroom. The supportive interaction in 6 came from both individual and group reflection and did make for more effective work. So here's how it went. The students reflected on their own experiences. They wrote questions for and administered an interview of a staff member who they chose and who they considered a valuable resource for future students and for themselves. The students practiced multiple times interviewing in student pairs and recorded and analyzed their English and interviewing skills. After practicing, they used flip cams to record the staff interviews. I'll say that technology was really a great aid during this project, because the students received real-time feedback in a way they couldn't have from me by actually watching their interviews. This connects to WTS4, using a variety of instructional strategies and technology. This actual artifact I'm going to have to include as an addendum at the end of this video tour, because again, these are taped interviews. But first, let me reflect on this so you can then look at them afterwards. Because they needed to interact with staff members, this is on the positive side of this project, they needed to interact with staff members in the school and record their own interviews. They were way more invested in practicing the questions and the English required for a successful interview, especially when they knew it could potentially be shown to new students or other people in the school. So as such, it had really built-in formative and summative assessments, because the student work was videotaped, then it was assessed and corrected by both the students, and then I corrected it. This is WTS 8, understands and uses informal and formal assessment strategies. That worked very, very well. When the student was struggling with the content or exceeding expectations, I was able to adjust my instruction accordingly. And due to the varying levels of English in the classroom, I had to offer more scaffolding to some students than others, and use creative pairing of students with higher language proficiency with, for example, lower skilled students, which would be Wisconsin Teacher Standard 2, understanding how children with broad ranges of abilities learn and providing instruction. The downside of this lesson, and you'll see this when you see the interviews, is that it was difficult to compile all of our interviews into one video, and believe it or not, this is an ongoing process. If I were to do this unit again, I'd have the technological resources in place and allow more time for collaborative student work and for the compilation and the editing process. So far, this has not been edited into a video. So in this situation, I'm going to offer this as an example of a poor artifact, or one that really hasn't worked. Although it has the potential to be a great artifact if I can ever get the technology together to do it properly. But we have old computers in my classroom, and then since we're not a mainstream classroom, we have a hard time getting in the Mac lab, and it's kind of hard so far to put this together so that all the students are able to work on it together using a computer to edit it. Although there are some really great individual pieces which I will attach to this after this interview. To this end, I have plans for professional development over the summer using technology that may make video production a smoother process, and one that hopefully I can utilize in further classrooms, because I really like this project a lot. I think the kids liked it a lot, and I would like to see it come to completion hopefully by the end of this semester. That will happen. But again, that's taken a lot longer than I would have hoped. So this ends my video portfolio for my alternative education licensure program at UW Wisconsin Whitewater. And please, after you after you finish watching this video, you're going to have another one attached. That will be the artifacts, which I believe would be artifact 4 from the student interview guide, so you can view those. Thank you for staying with me for this long.